Hey there. Ready for a deep dive into a topic that's both fascinating and pretty complex?
Always ready.
Today we're tackling eating disorders,
Mm,
a topic that's often misunderstood and surrounded by, myths.
definitely. A lot of misconceptions floating around out there.
You've given us a really interesting mix of sources for this deep dive.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, from the Oxford Handbook of Eating Disorders to like some pretty cutting-edge research articles. So
Cool. Sounds like a good mix.
it seems like you want to really gain a solid understanding of these conditions, starting from their historical roots all the way to the latest approaches in treatment and prevention.
Exactly. I think that's where a lot of the confusion and misunderstanding comes from. Not having the full picture.
Right, right.
So, yeah, we'll be exploring the history of eating disorders, try to unravel some of the challenges of diagnoses.
Okay.
We'll delve into the how treatment works, both the psychological and pharmacological approaches. And then look at the role of genetics and culture. And of course, we'll touch upon the crucial aspects of assessment and prevention.
Okay, wow. Sounds like we've got a lot to unpack here. So let's start by shattering a common misconception, right?
Yeah.
You know how eating disorders are often portrayed as like a modern phenomenon.
Yeah, definitely. You hear that a lot.
Well, our deep dive into the Oxford Handbook reveals that that's simply not true.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? The handbook highlights cases of anorexia nervosa. They were documented in Great Britain, Western Europe, and the U.S., going back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Wow. So we're talking over a century ago.
Yeah, over a century ago. Imagine that.
Okay, but if eating disorders aren't like just a product of our modern image-obsessed culture, what was going on back then? What were the societal pressures and influences that might have contributed to like these early cases?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
Researchers are still trying to figure that out. It just speaks to how complex these conditions really are. We don't have all the answers about the past, but we do know the incidence of eating disorders. It has significantly increased in the West over the past 80 years. And here's where it gets even more interesting. They've also emerged in non-Western countries following World War II.
Okay.
So it's almost like a ripple effect, across time and cultures.
Wow, that really challenges the notion that this is solely a modern problem.
For sure.
But what could be driving this increase? Is it purely cultural influence or?
If we connect it to the bigger picture, think about the massive global shift that happened in the 20th century, like westernization, modernization, the rise of mass media, all of these things, they exposed more people to Western ideals of thinness. And so researchers believe this played a significant role in the rising incidence of eating disorders, especially during times of rapid cultural transition.
It's almost like a domino effect, right? These huge societal changes kind of trigger shifts in cultural norms and ideals, which then create like this breeding ground for these conditions to flourish.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've established that eating disorders have a long and complex history.
Yeah.
Now let's dive into the world of diagnosis. How do we actually identify and label these conditions?
Oh, that's where things get a bit tricky.
Okay.
The Oxford Handbook goes into the DSM criteria, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, that is for anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder.
Right.
But it also highlights a particularly challenging area, EDNOS, or eating disorder not otherwise specified.
Ednosis. That, it always sounds to me like a bit of a catch-all category. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it can definitely feel that way.
What exactly does it mean?
Well, EDNOS is used when someone doesn't meet the strict criteria for those other eating disorders, the ones we just mentioned,
Wow.
but they're still, clearly struggling. So think of it as a placeholder while professionals are trying to get a clearer picture of what's going on.
Okay.
And here's where the handbook raises a really important point. There's a growing movement to move away from rigidly defined categories.
Interesting.
Like altogether. Some researchers argue that we should stop reifying the DSM. Basically, we shouldn't treat it as the ultimate authority.
So instead of just like slapping a label on someone, we need to, take a more nuanced approach.
Exactly. There's a lot of interest in exploring personality clusters within diagnoses. For example, looking at whether someone is more impulsive and emotionally dysregulated versus more compulsive and emotionally constricted.
Okay.
This kind of insight could lead to more personalized and effective treatment approaches.
So it's like saying, hey, we recognize that everyone's different and a one-size-fits-all approach to diagnosis might not be the most helpful.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've explored the history and the complexities of diagnosis. Now, what about treatment?
Okay.
What does the current landscape look like?
Well, the good news is that there are a variety of treatment approaches available, and they encompass both psychotherapy and pharmacotherapy.
Okay.
Now, psychotherapy involves talk therapy and behavioral interventions.
Right.
Some well-known approaches include cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, interpersonal psychotherapy, or IPT, and family-based therapy. Each of these targets different aspects of the disorder.
Okay, so lots of options there. But what about medication? Does that like really play a role in treating eating disorders?
That's an important question, and it's where the conversation it gets a bit nuanced.
Okay.
So while medication can sometimes be part of the treatment plan, things like SSRIs, antipsychotics, and others,
Uh-huh.
it's not a magic bullet. Pharmacotherapy and eating disorder treatment is still a developing area, and research is ongoing.
Right.
But what we do know is that medication is often most effective when used in conjunction with therapy. And the choice of medication should always be tailored to the individual's needs and any co-occurring conditions they might have. Think of it as another tool in the toolbox, not a standalone solution.
So it's about finding the right combination of tools for each person, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Right.
Okay, we've covered history, diagnosis, and the basics of treatment. But what about the underlying factors that kind of contribute to these conditions? Could something like genetics play a role?
That's a question that has intrigued researchers for a long time. And the answer is yes, genetics definitely play a role. Twin studies have shown a significant genetic component to eating disorders,
Okay.
suggesting there's a predisposition that can be passed down through families.
So if someone in your family has an eating disorder, you might be more likely to develop one yourself.
Potentially, yeah.
But are genes the whole story?
That's where things get even more fascinating. While genes, they lay the groundwork, they don't determine the whole outcome. You're right. Our ancestors weren't flipping through fashion magazines and, obsessing over calorie counts.
Right.
So clearly something else is at play.
Right.
And the Oxford Handbook is very clear on this. The environment plays a crucial role, particularly family dynamics and cultural pressures.
Okay.
It's this interplay of nature and nurture that ultimately shapes an individual's vulnerability to developing an eating disorder.
It's like a recipe. Right.
Right.
You might have some key ingredients passed down through your genes, but the environment ultimately determines how those ingredients are combined and what the final dish, looks like. Okay, so we've got genetics and environment. Now let's zoom in on the cultural side of things. How exactly does culture shape our views on body image and food?
This is where we start to unpack some of the societal forces that can contribute to these conditions. Westernization and modernization, with their emphasis on thinness as an ideal, are major factors. It's not just about the images we see in the media, though those certainly play a role.
Right.
It's about the subtle messages that we absorb about worthiness, success, and belonging.
It's like being bombarded with these messages about what a quote-unquote desirable body looks like.
Yeah,
And it can be hard to escape those influences even if you try.
it really can.
So how do we navigate this complex landscape of influences and risks?
That's where assessment and prevention come in. The Oxford Handbook and those research articles you shared, they both highlight the importance of early identification and intervention.
Okay.
There are screening tools and comprehensive assessments that can help healthcare professionals identify potential eating disorders early on.
So catching it early is key.
Absolutely.
But what about preventing these conditions in the first place? I know there's been a lot of talk about body positivity lately, but is that enough?
Body positivity is definitely a step in the right direction, but the handbook emphasizes that we need a multi-pronged approach to prevention.
Right.
This includes things like dissonance-based programs. These are interventions that challenge the thin ideal and encourage critical thinking about media messages.
Okay.
We also need media literacy programs to help people, especially young people, kind of deconstruct the images and messages they're, constantly bombarded with. And of course, promoting positive body image and healthy eating habits is crucial. It's about empowering individuals to make informed choices and value themselves for who they are, not what they look like.
So it's we need to kind of fight back against those unrealistic beauty standards and create a culture that celebrates diversity and individuality.
Exactly, and we can all play a role in that.
Right.
By challenging those harmful messages, promoting body acceptance, and encouraging healthy attitudes towards food and body image, we can create a more supportive environment for everyone.
Okay, so we've got history, diagnosis, treatment options, the role of genetics and culture, and even a glimpse into prevention. Hmm. It's a lot to digest, but it feels like we're building a solid foundation for understanding these complex conditions. Now, I'm curious, if genetics and environment are both contributing factors, how do those two forces actually work together to influence the development of eating disorders? Is it like a tug of war?
That's a great question, and it's something that researchers are still trying to fully unravel. It's not always a clear-cut tug of war. It's more like a complex dance. You see certain environmental factors can trigger or exacerbate genetic
So
predispositions.
someone might have like a genetic vulnerability to anxiety, and then a culture that equates thinness with worthiness just like amplifies that anxiety.
Exactly. It's like a perfect storm brewing.
Mm.
A genetic predisposition combined with, specific environmental pressures. And it highlights why it's so crucial to understand both the internal and external factors at play.
This brings us to a topic that's almost impossible to ignore in today's world.
Yeah.
Social media. It seems like everyone's talking about its impact on body image. Is it like really as bad as people say?
Well, social media is a powerful tool. And like any powerful tool, it can be used for good or for ill. It can be a source of connection, support, and even body positive messaging.
Right.
But it can also be a breeding ground for comparison, unrealistic beauty standards, and a relentless stream of, filtered perfection.
It's like being constantly bombarded with images of, ideal bodies and lifestyles, which can make it even harder to develop a healthy relationship with your own body.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what can we do about it? Should we all just, like, delete our social media accounts?
Well, that's certainly an option, but it's not always realistic or necessary. The key is to be mindful of what you're consuming. Be selective about who you follow. Unfollow accounts that trigger negative feelings and seek out accounts that promote body positivity and diversity. Remember, social media is a curated reality, and those quote-unquote perfect images are often heavily edited and filtered.
It's about, like, taking control of your social media feed and making it a place that supports your well-being rather than a source of stress and comparison.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, let's switch gears a bit and talk about the importance of early detection and intervention. If we can catch these conditions early on, does that really make a difference in the long run?
Absolutely. Early intervention is absolutely crucial when it comes to eating disorders. The earlier we can identify and address these conditions, the better the chances of a full and lasting recovery.
But how do we actually detect these conditions early on? What are some signs that friends, family members, or even individuals themselves can look out for?
Well, there are a number of warning signs to be aware of, but some common ones include dramatic weight loss or fluctuations, a preoccupation with food and calories, distorted body image, excessive exercise, social withdrawal, and changes in mood and behavior.
So it's important to, like, pay attention to both the physical and emotional changes that might be happening. Don't just dismiss those red flags.
Exactly. If you notice any of these signs, it's essential to reach out to a healthcare professional. Don't hesitate to ask for help.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but I think it's important to acknowledge something that often gets overlooked: the stigma that still surrounds eating disorders.
You're absolutely right. Stigma is a major barrier to seeking help and receiving appropriate care. Eating disorders are often seen as a choice, a vanity issue, or something that only affects certain types of people, and that's simply not true.
And those kinds of misconceptions can be incredibly harmful. They perpetuate shame and silence, which can prevent people from, getting the help they need. So how do we break down these stigmas?
It starts with education and open conversations. We need to educate ourselves and others about the realities of eating disorders, challenge the myths and stereotypes that perpetuate stigma, and create safe spaces for individuals to, share their experiences without fear of judgment.
It's about shifting the conversation from, blame and shame to compassion and understanding.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that eating disorders are serious mental illnesses and that anyone can be affected, regardless of their age, gender, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation so far. I feel like we've really started to kind of peel back the layers of complexity surrounding eating disorders, but we've only just scratched the surface. There's still so much more to explore, especially when it comes to treatment, recovery, and the long-term impacts of these conditions.
Absolutely. And that's precisely where we'll pick up in our next deep dive session. We'll delve deeper into the nuances of treatment, explore different therapeutic approaches, and discuss the importance of a holistic approach to recovery.
Sounds like we've got a lot more to unpack, but for now, I think it's time to take a break and, let all this information sink in. Thanks for joining us on this journey so far, and we'll see you back here soon for part 2 of our deep dive into eating disorders.
Looking forward to it. Welcome back. It's great to continue this exploration of eating disorders. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still so much more to uncover.
Yeah, for sure. I'm ready to dive back in. We ended the last part talking about the stigma surrounding these conditions.
Right.
But it's heartbreaking to think that, shame and fear could prevent someone from getting the help they need.
Yeah, it's a real concern. And it speaks to the importance of, open dialogue and education. We need to keep these conversations going to chip away at those harmful misconceptions.
Absolutely. And speaking of needing help, we touched on the different types of treatment available, but I'd love to explore those in more detail.
Okay.
What can you tell us about the specific therapeutic approaches used to address eating disorders?
Well, let's start with cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. It's emerged as one of the leading treatments for bulimia nervosa and binge eating disorder.
Right.
The basic idea behind CBT is that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all interconnected.
So if you can change the way you think about food in your body, you can change your behavior around those things.
Exactly. CBT helps individuals identify and challenge those distorted thoughts and beliefs that drive unhealthy eating patterns. For example, someone might believe that their worth is tied to their weight or their shape.
Right.
CBT helps them examine the evidence for and against that belief, challenge its validity, and replace it with a more balanced and realistic perspective.
It's like taking those negative thought patterns and putting them on trial.
Yeah,
And if the evidence doesn't hold up, those thoughts get, tossed out.
that's a great analogy. And the good news is that there's a lot of research supporting the effectiveness of CBT for eating disorders.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah. But it's not the only option. Interpersonal psychotherapy, or IPT, focuses on improving interpersonal relationships and communication skills.
That makes sense. If someone's eating disorder is connected to relationship problems or, difficulty expressing their emotions, IPT could be a valuable tool.
Precisely. IPT helps individuals identify and address interpersonal issues that might be contributing to their eating disorder, such as unresolved grief, conflicts with family members, or, difficulty forming healthy relationships.
So it's about recognizing that eating disorders aren't just about food and body image.
Right.
They can also be deeply intertwined with our social and emotional lives.
Definitely.
Now, what about family-based therapy? We briefly mentioned that earlier, but I'm curious to learn more.
Sure. Family-based therapy, or FBT, has shown great promise for adolescents with anorexia nervosa.
Okay.
It involves parents taking an active role in their child's recovery.
So instead of the parents feeling powerless or blaming themselves,
Yeah.
they're empowered to be part of the solution.
Exactly. In FBT, parents are coached on how to help their child reestablish healthy eating habits and regain weight. They become the primary therapists at home, working in collaboration with the treatment team.
It sounds like a real team effort,
Mhm.
with the family rallying around the individual to provide support and guidance. I can imagine that's incredibly important during such a challenging time.
It is. It's crucial.
Now, we've been focusing a lot on the psychological side of eating disorders, but I know these conditions can also have, a serious impact on physical health.
Yeah, definitely.
What are some of the medical complications that can arise?
Unfortunately, eating disorders can affect virtually every organ system in the body. Malnutrition, which is often a consequence of anorexia nervosa, can lead to a whole host of problems.
Oh, wow.
Heart problems, kidney problems, bone loss, hormonal imbalances.
That's a lot to deal with.
Yeah.
And I imagine the longer the eating disorder goes untreated, the greater the risk of these complications developing, right?
You're absolutely right. Early detection and intervention are key to minimizing these risks. With bulimia nervosa, the repeated purging behaviors like self-induced vomiting can cause electrolyte imbalances.
Electrolyte imbalances, that sounds pretty serious.
It can be. Electrolytes are minerals that are, essential for normal body function. And when those levels get out of whack, it can lead to heart rhythm disturbances, seizures, and other serious medical problems.
So it's not just about the psychological distress of the eating disorder. It's about the very real and potentially, life-threatening physical consequences as well.
Right.
And what about the constant purging itself? Does that cause any damage?
It definitely can. The repeated contact with stomach acid can erode tooth enamel, leading to cavities and tooth sensitivity. It can also irritate and damage the esophagus, increasing the risk of ulcers, tears, and even esophageal cancer.
It's like this vicious cycle. The eating disorder creates physical health problems, which can then, exacerbate the mental and emotional distress, making it even harder to break free from the cycle.
You've hit the nail on the head. That's why it's so important to have a multidisciplinary approach to treatment, addressing both the psychological and medical aspects of these conditions.
So a team effort is key, with therapists, nutritionists, and medical doctors all working together to support the individual's recovery.
Exactly. It takes a village, as they say.
Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about prevention. We touched on this earlier, but what are some, concrete things that parents, educators, and even friends can do to help prevent eating disorders from developing in the first place?
That's a question that's close to my heart. I think it all starts with creating an environment that supports body acceptance and challenges those narrow beauty standards that we see all around us.
So celebrating diversity in body shapes and sizes and promoting a message of, self-acceptance over self-criticism.
Yes, it's about shifting the focus from appearance to health and well-being. And it's about having open and honest conversations about food and body image without shame or judgment. Parents can model healthy eating habits and attitudes towards their own bodies.
Right.
And educators can incorporate media literacy into their curriculum to help young people critically evaluate the messages they're receiving.
It's like we need to equip young people with the tools to resist those harmful messages and build a strong foundation of self-worth that's not tied to their appearance.
Precisely. And don't underestimate the power of simply listening and offering support to those who might be struggling. Sometimes just knowing that someone cares and understands can make a world of difference.
That's so true. Sometimes just feeling heard and validated can be the first step towards seeking help.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm curious about the recovery process itself. What does recovery from an eating disorder, look like? And what are some key factors that contribute to a successful and lasting recovery?
That's a great question. Recovery is a journey, not a destination. It's about more than just restoring weight or stopping binging and purging. It's about developing a healthy relationship with food and your body and learning to cope with the underlying emotional and psychological issues that contributed to the disorder in the first place.
It sounds like a holistic approach,
Yeah.
addressing all aspects of the individual's well-being.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that recovery takes time and effort.
Right.
There will be ups and downs, but with the right support and treatment, it's absolutely possible. Some key factors that contribute to successful recovery include having a strong support system, developing healthy coping mechanisms, and addressing any co-occurring mental health conditions like anxiety or depression.
So it's not just about treating the eating disorder in isolation, but looking at the whole picture of the individual's, mental and emotional health.
Precisely. And it's crucial to remember that everyone's recovery journey is unique. What works for one person might not work for another. It's about finding the right combination of treatments and support that fits the individual's needs and helps them build a life that's free from the grip of the eating disorder.
It's inspiring to hear that recovery is possible, even though the journey might be long and challenging.
It is.
Now, we've talked a lot about the influence of Western culture on eating disorders, but I'm curious to know, how did these conditions manifest in other cultures? Are there any, significant differences in the way they're experienced or expressed?
That's a fantastic question, and it highlights the importance of cultural sensitivity when it comes to understanding and treating eating disorders. The Oxford Handbook actually addresses this point, emphasizing that we can't assume a one-size-fits-all approach to these conditions.
So symptoms and behaviors might, look different depending on the cultural context.
Precisely. For example, in some cultures, food restriction might be less about achieving thinness and more about adhering to religious or spiritual practices,
Yeah.
or certain body image ideals might be rooted in cultural traditions that differ from Western beauty standards.
That makes a lot of sense. We can't just impose our own cultural lens on these conditions.
Right.
We need to be aware of those cultural nuances to ensure that assessment and treatment are tailored to the individual's specific needs and background.
You're absolutely right. Cultural sensitivity is crucial. It's about respecting those differences, being open to learning from other perspectives,
Yeah.
and recognizing that there's no single right way to experience or express an eating disorder.
It's been such an enriching conversation so far. We've delved into the history, the complexities of diagnosis and treatment, the interplay of genetics and environment, and the importance of cultural sensitivity. It feels like we're starting to paint a more complete picture of these multifaceted conditions.
I agree. And I think this sets the stage perfectly for our final deep dive session, where we can explore the latest research, discuss emerging trends in treatment, and contemplate the future of eating disorder prevention and recovery.
I'm already looking forward to it. But for now, I think it's time to take a breather and, let all this incredible information settle in. Thanks for joining us on this leg of the journey, and we'll see you back here soon for the final part of our deep dive into eating disorders. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the world of eating disorders. It's been quite a journey, exploring those historical roots, the diagnostic dilemmas, and the complexities of treatment.
Yeah, it really has. It's a topic that that truly highlights the intricate connection between like mind, body, and culture.
One thing that keeps coming up for me is the role of food itself. It's something we all need to survive. Yet for those with eating disorders, it becomes almost like a battleground.
That's a really insightful observation. For most people, food is a source of pleasure, nourishment, and even social connection. But for someone, struggling with an eating disorder, those positive associations can become like completely distorted. Food can become a source of fear, anxiety, or even obsession.
Right.
It's no longer about fueling the body. It's about controlling it, manipulating it, or, using it to cope with difficult emotions.
Right, right. It's like food becomes a symbol of their internal struggle, a tangible representation of the turmoil going on inside.
That's a powerful way to put it. And it underscores why treating eating disorders is so complex.
Yeah.
It's not simply about teaching someone to eat, quote unquote, normally. It's about helping them rebuild their relationship with food from the ground up. It's about addressing those deeply ingrained thought patterns, emotional triggers, and behavioral responses that have become like entangled with the act of eating.
So it's like rewiring those neural pathways and emotional circuits that have become associated with food and body image.
Exactly. And that requires a multifaceted approach, combining therapy, nutritional counseling, and sometimes medication. It's about creating a holistic treatment plan that addresses the individual's unique needs and helps them rediscover the joy and nourishment that food can bring.
Speaking of needs, we've talked a lot about the individual experience of eating disorders, but what about the impact on their loved ones? Families and friends often find themselves on the sidelines,
Yeah.
feeling helpless and unsure how to best support someone they care about.
Yeah, that's so true. Families play a crucial role in the recovery process, but it can be an incredibly challenging journey for them, too. They often experience a mix of emotions:
Right.
worry, frustration, anger, even guilt.
Right.
It's important to remember that they need support and guidance as well.
Yeah, so like they're on their own emotional roller coaster trying to navigate this unfamiliar and often frightening terrain.
That's a great analogy, and that's why family therapy can be such a valuable um, component of treatment and helps families understand the nature of eating disorders.
Right.
Develop healthy communication patterns and learn how to best support their loved one's recovery.
So it's not just about, treating the individual, but about supporting the entire family system as they heal and rebuild together.
Absolutely. The family can be a powerful source of strength and resilience throughout the recovery process.
We've covered a lot of heavy stuff in this deep dive, but I wanted to end on a hopeful note. What are some things that give you hope for the future of, eating disorder treatment and prevention?
Well, I'm incredibly encouraged by the growing awareness surrounding these conditions. We're finally starting to have more open and honest conversations about eating disorders, which helps break down stigma and encourages people to seek help.
Yeah, that shift in the conversation is so important. It's about creating a culture of understanding and compassion rather than judgment and shame.
Exactly. And I'm also excited about the advancements in research. We're
Yeah.
learning so much more about the neurobiology of eating disorders, which is leading to the development of more more targeted and effective treatments.
So we're moving toward more personalized approaches tailored to the individual's like specific needs and brain chemistry.
Precisely. And that's incredibly promising. I truly believe that as our understanding continues to evolve, we'll see even greater strides in both treatment and prevention.
I love that optimistic outlook. So if there's like one key takeaway you'd want our listeners to remember from this deep dive, what would it be?
Remember that eating disorders are serious mental illnesses, but recovery is always possible. There's hope and there is help available. Don't suffer in silence. Reach out to a trusted healthcare professional, connect with support groups, and surround yourself with people who understand and care.
That's such a powerful message. And remember, you are not alone. There's an entire community of people who has, walked this path and emerged stronger on the other side.
Their stories are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and they offer hope and inspiration to those still on their journey.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. I feel like we've gained a much deeper understanding of the complexities surrounding eating disorders, from their historical context to the latest advancements in treatment.
Yeah, me too. It's been a privilege to share this journey with you.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into the world of eating disorders. Remember, knowledge is power. And the more we understand about these conditions, the better equipped we are to support ourselves and those around us. If you're looking for more information or resources, check out the links in our show notes. And most importantly, remember that recovery is possible. Keep fighting, keep seeking support, and never give up hope.
Well said.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and take care of yourselves and each other.